Heartsick, a thriller. This is like the tiniest lettering. By Chelsea Kane. Yes. Anyway, I read this. Okay. So I basically read this because I found it on a list somewhere on Crime Reads, and it describes its main character as a damaged police detective, and it's like, I really like those. Yeah, but it was, anyway, it was good. So what it's about a Portland area police detective who spends like 10 years chasing this one serial killer, only for her to actually kidnap him and hold him for like 10 days and torture him, and now he's majorly fucked up. And it's 2 years after that, and he's gotten out of his break. He wasn't retired, but like his like health break or whatever, to catch another serial killer who is preying on teenage girls. And the other main character is a newspaper reporter named Susan. And this book has like a ton of coincidences, although then you kind of get to the end and you're like, oh wait, I guess this makes sense. And it's ridiculous, and it's like, it's horrible. Like, I like that, okay? I'm saying these all as compliments, because when I pick up a book that's explicitly picked it up because it's about a character who is majorly messed up after having been tortured, I expect it to be fucked up, and it very much is. So yeah, that was good. And I liked the ending. I was worried, you know, it's one of those things with books like this, especially, where I like the dark storyline, but I want a specific kind of ending, and the book gave me an acceptable ending, so I'm like, okay. It has sequels, and I am actually interested in reading them, so that might happen at some point. I think there's 5 books in total that this author's written about this particular character. Archie Sheridan, I assume, is in all the books, but I don't know about the reporter. She might just be in this one. I have no idea. Yeah, and it's good. Yeah, so, you know, I can recommend. It's good. Star Wars, from a certain point of view, by a lot of people. So, this was published fairly recently, for the 40th anniversary of Star Wars Episode 4, and it is a collection of 40 short stories, all of which are around the premise of A New Hope and about the characters that are in it, but like not the main characters. So there's stories that tie in, well, there's stories about characters that appear briefly in the movies, like Bail Organa or Aunt Beru. Oh, Bail Organa's not in this movie. Right, shit. But he's mentioned. And then there's characters that are just completely made up for this book. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very cute. It kind of harkens back in some ways to the short story collections published some years ago. I read a few of them. Like, one of them was called Tales from the Cantina, and there was like Tales from Jabba's Palace, and the premise was that all of the random alien characters, like, each of them would have a story, and it was all like their backstory and stuff. So that's kind of what's going on here. Yeah, and they're by a lot of recognizable names, some of whom have written other Star Wars books, and some of whom are just like Griffin McElroy, or real sci-fi author Ken Liu, or Meg Cabot, who you've definitely heard of if you're my age, or Will Wheaton, who is not an author, but hey, whatever. I don't know what he does with his life. Maybe he is an author. Anyway, I thought it was fun. I thought it was definitely worth it. It definitely ties in with like the TV shows and the spin-off movies and stuff as well. So it mentions things that happened in, say, Rogue One kind of a lot. Since that's, you know, the events that the Rebels were doing right before this movie. So, I would definitely recommend reading it if you're a fan of Star Wars, and even if you're a fan of Star Wars who doesn't tend to read the books and stuff, because, you know, it's short stories, it's not a huge commitment, and it'll mostly be characters that you recognize, or at least places that you recognize. My favorite story was probably Kelly Sue DeConnick and Matt Fraction's story, The Cluehorn Cantina Caper. It was a little longer than the other ones, but I liked it was about some of the aliens that you see at the cantina, and just some, like, wacky shenanigans that they were up to. There was this delightful one called The Baptist by Nnedi Okorafor. I'm sure that's pronounced wrong. Apologies. But it was entirely about the creature that lives in the garbage compactor. Loved it. That one was fantastic. That is like exactly what this sort of book should be about, you know. There were some fun ones about Imperials working on the Death Star. There was the one by Griffin McElroy, I really liked it, was about a Jawa who longs to leave Tatooine and go among the stars. Yeah, it's really good. And Wedge is in a couple of the ones. So the way they're set up is generally in, like, order of when they're set during the movie. So you get kind of like a lot of Tatooine ones, and then you get like Imperial ones, you know. Yeah, but anyway, since Wedge was in some of them, I'm like really wanting to read the X-Wing series again, so that might happen, fair warning. But yeah, till then, Star Wars, from a certain point of view, good book. It is fun. I do recommend it. This Republic of Suffering, Death in the American Civil War by Drew Gilpin Faust. Yeah, so this is obviously nonfiction, and it's written by the president of Harvard? Sorry, I didn't actually read her little biography back here. Okay. Anyway, it's about death and the American Civil War. Shocker. I don't have that much to say about this. It was fine. It was informative. It's just basically about exactly what it says it's about. And it's topics ranging from, like, how people counted how many people were dead, which was difficult because at the time records really weren't kept at all, and how the Civil War kind of was the genesis of what we would consider sort of like normal, but at the time they didn't do, which is like the obligation of the country to return all of the dead soldiers and to make sure they know who died and where and all of that, and to keep accurate records like that. There's a lot of stuff about the variety of people who went to try and find dead relatives, or just find out what had happened to their relatives that they weren't hearing from, and all the people after the war who banded together to try and put the dead in, like, proper graves. And also stuff about how the concept of, because, like, at the time there was this concept of the good death, and, like, because America has such a overwhelmingly Christian population, especially at the time, there was this kind of like notion of how you should die, like not literally what kills you, but like you're supposed to be kind of like ready to die, like resigned to it, and like you're supposed to be with your family and to be able to tell them about how you believe in God and stuff, because then they will be able to think, okay, this person is going to go to heaven. But obviously when you die on a battlefield 1,000 miles away from home, that's not really a thing you can do. So people's concepts of what could be included in a good death like had to expand. So I don't know, it was interesting. The impression I got is that she read like a lot of letters that people wrote to their families during the Civil War. And it was fine. It wasn't like super fascinating or anything, but it was, it was as described, so I can't complain. The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. Finally, some good fucking food. Alright. Science fiction. I'm so sad because this book says she's not dead, but she is. Okay, anyway. This is a science fiction book, and it's actually, I'm sure you can see it's really short, but I bought it when I went to a bookstore earlier this summer, and isn't it pretty? Anyway, Le Guin is one of my favorite authors, and she's one of the authors that I am just like working my way through all of her books, and I had never heard of this one, but now I have read it. It's really good. Like, I loved it. Obviously, like, I've loved everything I've read by Le Guin. Like, by the way, fun fact, so this book has an introduction by Ken McLeod, then it has an introduction by Ursula K. Le Guin, written like 2 years after the book was published, and one of the things she mentions is that its first editor was Harlan Ellison, and he made her change the title because it used to be called The Little Green Men. And I'm like, come on, that would have been great. Okay, it's one of them sci-fi novels that's very much about a thing, and in this case, it's about Vietnam, the war. But of course, it's set in the future, and its humans are exploiting this planet with, that basically is just like an ocean with a bunch of islands, and they're just completely covered in forests. And like, the people who live there are nothing like the Vietnamese. Like, there's nothing going with that comparison. It's just that the senseless, like, hatred of them and exploitation of the place and all of that. Plus, she says pretty explicitly in the introduction that she wrote the book when she was at a time and place when she couldn't actually do anything. Like, she said that she spent, when she was in Portland, she went to a lot of protests and stuff of the war, but then she wrote this book while she was in London for like a year doing something else and couldn't do that, and so she was just like, I have to do something, so she wrote this book. Anyway, it won the Hugo Award. I thought it was really good. My favorite stuff actually was the chapters from the perspective of the one human who like really hates the native beings that live on the world, and just being inside his head was so interesting because he was just such a hateful dick. He just hated everybody. The way he thought about everybody was just fascinatingly hateful. I don't know. But yeah, it's really good. I don't know what else to say, really. I don't want to tell you what it's about exactly. It's just kind of like humans want to cut down the trees on this planet, and this leads to clashes with the native people who have a very different culture. One thing I thought was interesting is a lot of the book is from the perspective of one of these native characters. His name is Salvar. And Salvar and the others, like, there are times when they're talking about the humans and saying they're insane. And it's interesting because, of course, the humans aren't insane. They just have a different way of, like, thinking. So it's interesting to see that it goes both ways, that complete lack of understanding. But, of course, the book is never unclear at all about the fact that the humans started this shit. You know, so it's really good. Yeah, I feel like that's all I say in these reviews. It's good. You should rate it. This is a really pretty book. Look at, I like how the sky, the stars kind of come through like a little bit, and then, anyway. Yes, this is excellent. Bunk by Kevin Young. This is nonfiction, and I just finished it the other day. It's, well, it's about what it says it's about. The history of the hoax is a peculiarly American phenomenon, although he does definitely talk about hoaxes that are, like, originate in Australia and England, too, but examining what motivates hucksters and makes the rest of us so gullible. Like, basically, this is an interesting book because most of the nonfiction I've read focuses either on science, or if it's about history, on some particular person or place or time. But this is a lot broader than that, and he has a thesis statement, so, like, there's a lot more analysis going on than in the stuff I usually read, but I liked it. It was interesting. I mostly picked it up because I wanted to learn about some of these hoaxes, and I did. Kind of, he starts with Barnum and moves through pretty much, like, this was published 2017, so he gets into Rachel Dolezal a little bit. And he ties all these things together with kind of the change from, well, he has two basic things that he talks about a lot. One of them is that back in the time of Barnum, the purpose of a hoax was to entertain, like, and it did entertain, and, like, basically Barnum was like, hey, it's fine if I lie about stuff, as long as once, whatever that gets you in the tent, and then I actually put on a good show. Versus the more modern day, like, hoaxes become less about fun and more about just, like, tragedy and stealing other people's stories and just, like, blatantly lying about all sorts of stuff. And the other second thing he talks about a ton is basically his thesis statement that race is the most insidious American hoax of all. And, like, I buy it because, like, you know, it's all lies, piled on lies. He links a lot of these different hoaxes and cases of plagiarism and cases of people writing fake memoirs to race in an interesting way. I don't know, just, like, it's a good book. It's not exactly what I was expecting, but it was totally worth reading. And it was kind of depressing, but it was also interesting. Just, it's funny how far some of these hoaxes went, especially the fake memoir ones. Like, these people, the stuff they wrote was just absolutely batshit, and yet people bought it. And, like, also you've got to consider that if it hadn't blown up, we probably never would have heard of it. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it's a good book.